Hello world, and welcome to All Things Java. Today's topic is switch statements. Now, you may be wondering, what are switch statements? Switch statements allow us to test a variable or equality against a list of values. In essence, a switch statement is a shorter way of writing a series of if-else blocks. Now let's take a look at the components of a switch statement. We start with the switch keyword followed by parentheses. Inside the parentheses is the variable we'd like to test. Here we see the curly braces. The curly braces are not optional and should always be used in the switch statement. Next is the case keyword, which includes the value we're testing the switch variable against. The output is what results if the case value matches the switch variable. Breaks are optional and only placed if we want to exit out of the switch statement. The default block is also optional and can be used to output something in the event that none of the case values match the switch variable. It's important to note here that the default block does not have to be placed at the end and can appear anywhere within the switch statement. In order to use the switch statement correctly and avoid compiler errors, we must remember several rules. These rules will become second nature to you after some practice, so no worries there. Rule number 1, the switch variable can only include the following data types: byte, short, character, integer, string, and enum. It does not support Boolean, long, float, and double data types. Number 2, the case value data type must match the switch variable data type. So if we use an integer in the switch variable, all case values must also be of type integer. And number 3, the case value may be a literal, a final variable, or an enum. The best way to learn any Java concept is to practice it. I typically use an online Java editor when I practice coding. Simply Googling Java Online Editor will yield numerous results. I prefer to use the one from jdoodle.com, but any will do. Let's start by declaring a variable type integer. In our case, the variable is num, and we'll set it to 5. Now we'll include the variable in the parentheses after the switch keyword. Next, we're ready to set up our cases. So here I'll make sure to include an integer as my case value because my switch variable was an integer. I'll set the first case to 4, followed by a print statement, and then a break. Next case value will be a match, so I'll include the literal value 5 here, then a message, and now a break. I'll add another case value, so here the literal 6, followed by a print statement, and then a break. Finally, I'll include the default block, followed by a print statement, and a break. Let's compile. So here the program compiled and the answer is what we anticipated it would be. The case value 5 matched the switch variable and we got the correct output. Now let's look at some scenarios where the program may fail to compile or the outcome may not be what we intended. Our first scenario involves a mismatch of data types between the switch statement and the case statement. So here I will change the integer value to a string value and see if it compiles. In this case, the program did not compile because the switch variable was an integer and the case value was changed to a string. In our next scenario, we will observe what happens when we omit a break statement after a case statement. So if you notice here, I've already changed the string value back to its original integer value just so that the program compiles. Now I'll remove the break statement after this case block, and let's see what the outcome would be. Our program outputs two messages instead of the intended one. By removing the break statement, the program automatically executes the next case block. Now, it stopped there just because the case block had a break statement. But if it had not, it would continue going to the following case block. This is probably not what we intended the output would be, but this will happen if we forget to include the break statements in their intended places. Finally, let's look at what happens to our program when we omit the break statement after the default statement. As previously mentioned, the default statement is optional and can appear anywhere inside the switch block. So currently, the default statement is at the very end of our program. Let's go ahead and change the case value to integer 7, just so that none of the cases match the switch variable and we can use the default statement. So here the program outputs the default message, which is what we intended. Let's see what happens when we leave the default statement in its current position, but remove the break statement. Again, the program compiles and the output is what we wanted. It's important to emphasize here that it's not necessary to put the break statement after the default statement if the default statement is at the end of the switch block. Now let's move the default statement to another location in the switch block and omit the break statement. So here the program outputs the default message and also the message in case 7. This occurred because the default statement didn't include the break statement, so the program moved on to the next case. It stopped after case 7 because case 7 had a break statement. Let's put in the break statement after the default statement and see what happens. In this scenario, the program compiles and outputs only the default message, which is what we had intended. This concludes our discussion on switch statements. Thank you for joining me and stay tuned for more.